Hey, welcome back to my kitchen. My name is Shanae and today we're going to make chocolate macarons. They're so chocolatey and rich. It's one of my favorite macarons. Unfortunately though, chocolate macarons are a little more complicated. We all know basic plain macarons are complicated, but adding cocoa powder makes it even more complicated. That's why if you're new to making macarons, if you haven't mastered the basic plain macarons, I would strongly recommend to work on your technique with plain macarons first before you get into chocolate macarons. Because we are adding cocoa powder, it makes the process a little more complicated, and unless you mastered your technique first, you wouldn't know if it's your technique issue, your oven issue, or it's because of the cocoa powder. So it will be more complicated to master the macarons if you start with chocolate macarons. If you're new to macarons, I strongly recommend watching my basic macaron recipe that I shared with lots of details, lots of tips, and a very detailed video already shared on my channel. But if you're up for a challenge, let's make chocolate macarons. And before I show you the process, I would like to talk to you about cocoa powder, because like I said, cocoa powder makes everything complicated. I think chocolate macarons are one of the most tested recipes that I have. Usually I test my recipes 3 to 4 times, especially for macarons, but with chocolate macarons, I'm not even kidding you guys, I've made it more than 24 times. My very first chocolate macarons looked like this. It took me like 5 tries to perfect the chocolate macarons, and then people started having problems, so I went back to my test kitchen, like trying perfecting a little more, and then I published my new and approved chocolate macarons. But here we are again with more testing, because again, I learned over the years more things, more about cocoa powders. In the last half a year or so, I casually tested different cocoa powders, and in the last month or so, I just started making one after another with different cocoa powders so that I can show you the different versions I've made and if you can see the difference and whatnot. I bought fancy cocoa powders like Valrhona cocoa powder, Gitard, Dutched. This is called Gitard Rich Dutched cocoa powder. I also tried cacao berry extra brut cocoa powder. I tried Hershey's natural cocoa powder. I tried the Ghirardelli natural and Ghirardelli Dutched cocoa powders. So basically the cocoa powder comes in 2 different variations, natural and Dutched. Natural cocoa powder, regular cocoa powder, is acidic ingredient. And when you Dutch it, it's basically you rinse it with an alkaline solution to neutralize the acids in the cocoa powder. So they're not acidic and they're more neutral. Dutch cocoa powder usually are darker in color and less chocolatey. Natural cocoa powder is acidic and more chocolatey. It's very important in recipes not to use interchangeably Dutched cocoa powder with natural cocoa powder, especially if you're making cakes and cupcakes, because natural cocoa powder and Dutch cocoa powder reacts differently with baking soda or leavening agents, so it will affect your rise of your cakes and whatnot. So if the recipe calls for natural cocoa powder in the cake recipe, definitely use natural cocoa powder and vice versa. But as far as macarons goes, we're not using any leavening agent except for meringue. And that's why it doesn't matter if you use Dutch cocoa powder or natural cocoa powder. And because Hershey cocoa powder is the most accessible for everyone, I'm going to make macarons today with Hershey's natural cocoa powder. After we make the chocolate macarons, we'll come back here and then we'll compare the cocoa powder, high-fat cocoa powder affected macarons and how they turn out with natural cocoa powder. So stay tuned, let's make chocolate macarons now. So I have 75 grams of egg whites here, and we'll add 75 grams of sugar into the meringue, and cream of tartar, salt, powdered sugar, cocoa powder, and almond flour. What we'll do is we will whisk the egg whites until nice and foamy. We'll add cream of tartar and salt, and then once the bubbles are a little more denser white color, we'll add start adding sugar a little at a time. And while the meringue is whipping, I'm going to sift the cocoa powder, almond flour, and powdered sugar, and then we'll do the macaronage. And once we get there, I'll show you the next step. We'll add 75 grams of powdered sugar and 10 grams of cocoa powder. 10 grams of cocoa powder is about 2 tablespoons. And then we'll sift the dry ingredients twice, and once the meringue is ready, I'll come back and show you what's the next step. So my meringue is ready. You wanna see nice stiff peaks like so, and sharp ribs like this. If you haven't watched my meringue video, go ahead and check that out, because I go in depth what signs we're looking for and the basics of making perfect meringue, French meringue. So go check it out. Now I'm going to add sift dry ingredients into the egg whites, and I will start macaronage, and then we'll start piping. The batter will be really stiff at the beginning, but as you fold, it will thin out. Now, if you make this recipe and your batter doesn't get runny at all, it just stays thicker or becomes even more thick. That's what I heard from people. Sometimes the batter doesn't get runny, instead they actually get harder and harder. In that case, you can take out 1 to 2 tablespoons of almond flour next time, and then try it again. It should work out perfectly. And I highly recommend weighing your egg whites, because sometimes people tend to not to weigh and just go by 2 egg whites, and every egg vary in different size and how much egg whites you actually extract from each egg. So make sure be careful with egg whites, and if you even the 2 grams of egg whites actually make difference. It's so funny, but that's how finicky these macarons are. As you can see now, the batter is getting nice and runny. Okay, my batter is ready. Now I'm going to transfer the batter into my piping bag. So I have my template here. If you don't have a template, you can download it for free on my website. All you need to do is sign up to my email list. In my very first email to you, I will send you templates to download. It's absolutely free, and you can unsubscribe afterwards. But I usually send out really good tips for macarons, so you can stay on my list too. So anyway, now I'm going to start piping. I'm using 2A tip here. Remove the template and tap, tap, tap. Instead of banging on the counter, I find tapping on the bottom works better and not as loud. And we'll get my macarons are dried. When you touch it, there shouldn't stick to your fingers. And my oven is already preheated to 300 degrees Fahrenheit, and I'm going to put it in about 18 minutes. Sometimes it takes 20 minutes, but we'll see, and I'll show you when they come out. So my first tray of macarons just came out. They're still pretty hot. I'm baking my second tray right now, and this one's baked for 20 minutes, and they look perfect. They're still pretty hot, so we'll see if I can peel it off. Perfect. So this is something to keep in mind. I sometimes get the messages and Instagram photos when some of the meat stuck to the parchment paper, and if you try to peel it off too soon before it's cooled, it does happen to stick to the parchment paper. But if you wait for them to cool, they should be peeled off perfectly. These macarons look pretty good. Nice shiny tops, nice feet, and let's see if we can break it into one. It's really hot, like I said. Nice and full. Look at this. Beautiful full shells and nice crispy tops. And I'm going to cool this down completely, and then I'm going to fill it with my chocolate Swiss meringue buttercream. I shared the video for this recipe a week ago, I think. In the center, I'm going to add a little bit caramel sauce. Also shared the video for caramel sauce. If you haven't checked it out, please go ahead and watch that. It's really, really easy. I like to add a little bit nice, bitter, sweet caramel in the center because it just adds a little bit dimension. The most important part, you will get the most delicious experience if you let them mature in the fridge for 24 hours. Okay, let's check out how these macarons compare with other macarons made with different cocoa powders. And here they are, all 6 macarons, and I put a little bit of each cocoa powder as well so we can see the different shades of brown of each cocoa powder and what kind of macarons and what shade of macaron they yielded. So the first one is this macarons made with cacao berry extra brut cocoa powder. I love the dark rich color. I think compared to all of them, it yielded the darkest macarons. But to be honest with you, when I was testing, they were little soft shells, but after they matured, they just turned out pretty good. And up next is Hershey's macaron that we just made. This is with natural cocoa powder. That's why they are a little paler. They yielded really nice macarons with nice smooth shells, beautiful feet, beautiful bottom as well. They're really nice. And if you don't like the paler color, you can always add a little bit brown food coloring. I usually don't do that, but I don't mind paler chocolate color. And next one is Ghirardelli natural cocoa powder. It's pretty much the same as Hershey's natural, right? I barely can tell the difference between them. I was really surprised by this. I also tried Ghirardelli Dutch cocoa powder, and although the cocoa powder itself is much darker than the natural version of Ghirardelli cocoa powder, they didn't yield darker macarons. They were pretty much the same color. It's really hard for me to tell. Up next, this one is with Guittard. I'm probably butchering the name, but Guittard Rich Dutch cocoa powder. As you can tell, it's lighter than Ghirardelli Dutch powder. Yielded a little darker macaron, but barely can tell the difference. And the last one is made with Valrhona cocoa powder. It doesn't say if it was Dutch or not, so I'm taking it as natural cocoa powder, but it's a really dark color. As you can tell, it's the second darkest cocoa powder compared to Extra Brut by Cacao Berry, and yielded the second darkest macarons. I really love the color of Valrhona, but again, they were kind of soft right out of the oven. I'll show you the image here. I can definitely notice the high fat affected the batter. So this is the result. As you can tell, these are the biggest shades. So this Hershey's, Cacao Berry, and Valrhona. I like the Valrhona one, but again, I like the Hershey's better because it's more reliable, more foolproof once you get the technique right. they yield the best macarons. And if you don't like the paler color, you can always add a little bit brown food coloring. Always use a gel version. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this little experiment and you learned something new. In conclusion, I would just say there is no right or wrong cocoa powder, but you will just have to tweak your recipe slightly to adjust it to your cocoa powder. So for high-fat cocoa powder, what I would do is I would go for less fatty almond flour. By the way, if you compare different brands of cocoa powder, they also have like the little slightly different fat percentages. I don't know if it's just how they measure it or actually they do something to defatten them. I don't know. So I would just go with the less fatty almond flour if you're going to use higher fat cocoa powder. And you can tweak it to your liking and produce the perfect chocolate macarons with any cocoa powder. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, comments, and feedback, please drop them in the comments below. I really enjoy reading your comments and communicating with you. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye.